Let's welcome our speakers. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself and share your story?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Mall. I live just outside of Philadelphia. I'm a husband and a dad and a designer and a creative director. And I used to run an agency called SuperFriendly and it specialized in design systems. We worked with lots of different enterprise clients on helping them figure out how to design at scale. I also wrote a book called Design That Scales about design systems and how designers and engineers and product folks and all the people that work on digital products can work together more closely and more collaboratively. Honored to be here. Happy to discuss all of the things with you all. Fareed, thank you for inviting me, and I'm really excited to be part of this amazing panel of amazing folks here.
Love it. Love it. Thank you. Patricia, would you like to go next?
Yeah. After done, it's easy. I didn't remember the book, Patricia. I started working on design systems in 2016, then moved to design leadership, like in more general sense, wider sense. Currently at Zalando, when we are implementing major brand refresh through design system. Previously, I was working at Brainly, and together with my team, we created multi-dimensional design system, how I called it, one source of truth for all cross-team design decisions, tools, processes. And we created tooling to bridge the gap between design and development that was open source and used by many teams around the world, including Microsoft for a moment. So it's not a book, it's something. We also, through this design system, we also connected product and marketing design with brand in the heart of it. And this philosophy is also visible in ZDS design system and approach to design systems. So this is my area. And I believe that this unification between product and marketing is also beneficial from the economic point of view. And for Brainly, it saves the company a lot of dollars. So I'm focusing on design foundations impact on business, working with stakeholders, and connecting the dots with the wider organization in general.
Love it. And connecting marketing and product, this is like a great achievement. We also went through the Wise design system. They also went through this process. It's pretty impressive. I hope that will be the future for the design systems. Love it. Lucas, would you like to go next?
Hey, thank you. I'm happy to be here. My name's Lucas. I'm a design technologist at HubSpot, particularly working on the Trellis design system. Previously, I was at Sprout Social, also working on design systems. I've been working in design systems since they were called web style guides. So it's been well over a decade now. Definitely in terms of startup and tech age, it feels like it's been decades, but I'm really happy to be here. I was previously a software engineer. I've coded a lot of design systems, and now I'm leaning back into the design side of things. So just really happy to be back into this sort of planning strategy and design side of things. And been really cool to see what people are coming out with, specifically the web component stuff we're going to talk about. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Love it. Lucas, you will be our engineering perspective here because we're all coming from like design and product backgrounds, and having engineering perspective is always a good thing. Thank you. Maya, would you like to share your story?
Yeah, of course. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Hampton. I'm a product manager for design systems. So I've been at REI for about 7 years, helping get their design system up and running and fully integrated. Actually, starting a new opportunity soon that I can't share the full details about, but I'm pretty excited. Staying unsurprisingly within the product management and design system space. So glad there's still that niche there to help bring design and engineering teams along. Really excited to see what the future holds. It feels like a really neat inflection point with design systems right now. And it's really looking forward to working with smart people like you all to figure out the future. Thanks for the invite again.
And I really admire your article on Medium around measuring the impact of design system, where you have visual real estate coverage, right? So if someone who is listening us can provide a link here at the bottom, that will be great.
Yeah, I can drop a link.
Thank you. And my name is Fareed. I'm going to host the Inspect and Reflect session today. Really excited to be with all of you. So this is all my like favorite people and the favorite topic and favorite number one design system in my subjective list, Shopify Polaris Design System. Who would like to go first and just share their perspective, their reaction on the Shopify Polaris Design System? Maybe then if you would like to go first to open up the discussions, be great.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I have Polaris up in front of me now, in addition to having the Fig Jam. And one of the things that I have always loved about the Polaris design system, they have this in every version I think that they've released, is if you go right up to the homepage, the front page, the front door, I think it matches a lot of what appeals to me and what I think is useful about systems theory. One of my favorite books about systems theory is Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. And a bunch of you have probably read that book. One of the first things that she says is what makes a system are three parts generally. It's elements, interconnections, and purpose. What I found is every design system out there has elements. Not a lot of them have intentional interconnections, and even fewer of them have purpose. What I love about the Polaris design system is right on the front door, they say Polaris is designed to shape the merchant experience for Shopify's core product, the admin. What a clear statement of it's not for our marketing stuff. It's not for this other stuff. It's for our admin products. And the fact that it has such a specific purpose, I've always been drawn to that because it gives me a way to react to the design system and know what to use it for and know what not to use it for. And I think that's the thing that I've seen missing in a lot of other design systems. And I think the Polaris team has always done a great job of that for many years and many iterations.
Love it. This is great. Patricia, do you have any thoughts on any things that you really like about the Polaris design system?
Yeah, I think super close to what Dan said, but not about the purpose of design system, but foundations in general, which plays into values they explain on the page. And I see this as a, like, first of all, great tool to improve design at scale and huge scale when it comes to Shopify. It's like merchants globally, the experience for shoppers around the world by teaching merchants and their teams what good design looks like. And they're talking in foundations, they're talking about accessibility, inclusivity, information architecture, and explaining it very like in actionable way, I would say. So this is awesome. And then there's values, which, yeah, close to the purpose, but more like a soul of it, soul of this design system, soul of this design that will be created. I really like that because it also connects to this concept of bringing brand into design system. So I see it as a soul of the design system, which is connected to the soul of the company.
Love it. And speaking about the purpose, so it's not available for, I'm curious, what is their licenses? Can people use their web components or React components in their products, or is only for Shopify?
I don't know the answer to that specifically, but I do find it really interesting that they are more opinionated than most design systems are in how you implement their layout and styling. One of the things that I really appreciated was looking through their dev docs, and you basically have two options, particularly when using the new web components, is you are given an S page or an S section layout style, which really appeals to me. I think there's a conversation to be had in design systems about layout theory and how we design rules around layout, because typically if you look at most design systems, we just give them a column component and a row component and we hand it off to our team and hope that it goes well. And I think it takes a lot of bravery from the Polaris team to say, we did layout really well and we expect you to do it properly with just these two attributes. So I think that's really cool.
Love it. That's the one that you are talking about, right? The layout page on the dev.
I have a shopify.dev link, but I'm sure it's the same or similar. It might just be specific to their web components. I'm not sure. I posted the link in the chat just in case.
Thank you. Maya, do you have any things to share about like what's your first reactions on the Shopify Polaris design system?
Yeah, it's certainly not the first time I've referenced their documentation site. It's one of the most robust and opinionated. So it's really great to see how they approach things at that foundational level around like internationalization is you don't see that as much in design systems. So it's a great source of truth. I think one of the things I've always referenced about their components and design system is I love that live demo they have at the top of each page where you can click through the variants. Did something similar like that, but it just gives you such a handy glimpse at all those different variants. And they even add a little subtitle in there under each one about here's when you use this and that, but just keeping that all top of page really helps see those variants. They certainly have quite a lot. And so from the maintenance of design system perspective, I'm sure they've got some systems in place for that. But I love how they just make that all really easy to find and visible at the top of the page before diving into a lot of the details. That's what I love the most about, I think, the React site, the new web component site. We can maybe get more into that. I got a little bit lost, to be honest, and found some dead links. So I can tell they're still working through that. But I can only imagine from the React site that they've got plenty of good stuff in the pipeline.
Well, but yeah, they just released web components, right? Couple weeks ago, couple months ago. So it's pretty, yeah. What I was surprised about is that within their new web components documentation, they have built an AI assistant that you can talk and chat and ask all of your questions about the components. And I didn't go too deep into that, but we'll love to know, like, what are your thoughts on creating this kind of AI assistants within the design system documentation? Have you tried it, or do you have any good tools for that?
I don't have any good tools for that, but I have some thoughts. Like this implementation of AI in design system, it seems like the opportunities and the possibilities are great, especially for the comprehensive design system like Shopify has. That you have not only components, but also those foundations and rules, like overarching rules that can help build with AI in the future, like entire interfaces with the context and with the proper internationalization, for example. So I would say it's very useful if you are lost in this comprehensivity because they have a lot of stuff here. But yeah, I feel like this is just the beginning, and I hope that Polaris has a dedicated team that will lead the way.
Love it. And we just tried here, how can I use layouts? Please share code for profile settings page. Looks like it's doing a good job. Lucas, you're here from engineering perspective. Do you have any thoughts on the response?
No, I think this is really great. And I think teams that have some sort of open API or open AI access to the API really should consider doing this. I think it can be a little tricky, right? Making sure you have the right docs read and make sure that it's not hallucinating, giving your engineers false information. But I also think there's some, to Patricia's point, right? This is just the beginning. Figma just released their new MCP server, which I highly recommend everyone look into. If you have engineers that you work closely together, you can now potentially, and it's opening up the doors for us to be able to connect Figma code directly to an engineer's IDE editor so that they can have sort of a conversation with Cursor and ask about your design system, ask about your tokens, and have those values come directly into your code. I think having a chatbot in your page is great for sort of reference things, but we can definitely already go further. And it's just a fun time, I think, to be exploring these tools.
We believe that there should be a documentation MCP in the future where I can just write those kind of questions within my Cursor or Visual Studio Code, and we'll go into my documentation guidelines and we'll just pull the right information from it.
Yeah, that's something we're playing with right now.
I love it. We'll love to hear your thoughts, and maybe we could organize another session for AI part and the ways how it could help the design systems. I had a couple of discussions around that. There is an interesting format called LMs.txt. People can search it online, but there is a new framework approach on how would you contextualize and summarize all your design system guidelines into one file that will be more like a sitemap.txt for search engine optimization, the same for all these AI chatbots. Great. Let's go through the Polaris React. Yes, I love that the way how they have this very interactive format of showing all the components that they have, the props, and very technical, but I feel like people and designers can actually read, and it's like very self-explanatory where you can understand what kind of variations are available for each of the props. I didn't see the connection with Figma within their documentation. So we'll love to see how Figma props are mapped to the React or web component props. So maybe there's some work going on, or some of the things are not supported yet, but they are planning to add more. So that will be something interesting to cover as well. And I love their search experience. By just typing anything here, let me go through the Shopify React. If I will say, for example, link, it will highlight all the tokens related to the link, all the components, all the icons, foundations, and even patterns. So how easy it is to search through their design system documentation is really impressive. Great. Let's go quickly through the Figma. So all the files that they have are open source in Figma as well.
More information
This additional contextual information.
there. To your point earlier, though, like where is that connection back to the doc site? I love to have that like super clear so you jump through those and get more information as useful.
Yeah, we went through the Figma storybook. They also have a section for tools. They actually try to expand the usage of their design system and integrating not only documenting things properly, but also expanding and make access to their design system much easier. So they created this Polaris for Visual Studio Code that has all this additional contextual information that will help engineers to write code. Lucas, do you have any thoughts on that? Different design systems trying to expand, maybe creating Figma plugins, Visual Studio Code plugins, all these AI MCP servers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this one's tricky, right? Because if you have the resources for this, obviously, I think anyone would recommend having these great tools. But I think there's some kind of low-hanging fruit that we can do to emulate a lot of these things. I think if your team uses TypeScript, then really emphasize making sure that your styles and your tokens are typed, so that at the very least your engineers can have that autocomplete. But if you have the resources to build like a plugin, it's not that heavy lifting. I think you can build a snippets plugin in VS Code, relatively little effort from an engineer. And especially now with like vibe coding tools, it might be even possible now for a designer to go in and build one themselves. So I highly recommend people give it a shot and play around with it, because you might be surprised what you can come up with and save people a lot of time. Even just having styles like tokens and variables of that sort are going to be super helpful for an engineer.
Love it. I would love to get your thoughts on this new trend that everyone talks about, having web components for the design system. Because a couple of months ago, I was thinking that React is a way to go, but looks like everyone talks about the web components at the moment. What are your thoughts on this kind of new trend? Maybe it's something new.
Relatively new, right? Because web components, I think a lot of folks have been moving their design systems toward web components maybe in the last 5 years. And prior to that, it just didn't seem nearly as viable, partially because of the lack of maturity of the web components technology as compared to the maturity of other languages and other frameworks like React or Angular or things like that. So I think part of it is the maturity of it is changing. I know at one point, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, looking into web components with some of the clients that I'd worked with was like a non-starter because of things that needed to happen that weren't cross-platform compatible or things like that. Now those conversations are different because I think a lot of those things are becoming resolved. Overall, in general, I'm a fan of community-initiated projects, open source projects, and more platform groups, as opposed to React is an open source project, but it's also, if you look at the incentives of a project like React, it comes from a specific place. And so you would imagine that the incentives of where React is going to go as a technology may align closely or not so closely with the place that it started from. Web components, as more of a standards-based thing, I think has different promises that it makes. Whether it delivers on those promises, we'll see. But I think as we get closer to the platform, I think that's the job of frameworks like React and Angular and proprietary things that come from a place, is they prove out the use case. Like we used to have polyfills for things that are now built into the browser, now that are built into web technologies and native JavaScript and things like that. We didn't have them before, and we needed the proprietary technologies to pave the way for them. I agree with the promise of web components. I think it's moving in a direction that I think overall is beneficial. Whether that makes things like React redundant or not, I don't know. I think we have at least a few years with those things. There are reasons that those technologies are powerful and those frameworks are powerful. So I think that we'll see those coexist for a while. Whether or not they coalesce, I've always been bad at predictions, so I'm not going to venture one here.
Love it. Maya, Patricia, do you have any thoughts on the web components? Is your team planning to use web components in your future, or you are still staying on the React or any other frameworks?
We don't know anything about engineering team at Zalando planning to go into web components. I feel it depends on the company and the company strategy. Do they, I don't know, plan to acquire different companies that use different technologies and use one design system for all those platforms, for example? Maybe that would make more sense to move from React to web components. That's my thinking, although I'm not an engineer. We are not planning at Zalando. Right now, actually, there is a rewrite to React Native, so I don't feel that would be direction. And so my thoughts are, it depends, and it's the decision that is taken by engineering lead, product manager, or any lead design system, but it doesn't stop here. You need to align with company leadership, and probably maybe even CTO will make that decision. It's not something that's taken lightly and need to be aligned with the strategy.
Love it. Maya, do you have any thoughts on the web components?
Yeah, I'd actually echo some of that experience as well. I know that's something that we've talked about in the background for years, but feels like a pretty significant effort to build those. And so I think to the point about the business case, something like Shopify's platform makes a lot of sense because they're supporting such a breadth of applications and technologies. And so it's really smart to have this underlying system. But for smaller design systems or the ones that support less platforms, it might add a lot of overhead if you already have an existing component library. And so I think this is going to be one of these more future-facing things as new design systems are being built, as the barriers to creating those and maintaining those lower. I think that's something that will evolve. For me, it also introduces more questions around operating models and maintenance. This is another library that we're supporting in addition to React or Vue or these more custom frameworks. I think, like Dan was saying, there's a really big opportunity for more community-driven opportunities there as well. But it might just kind of shape the current paradigm we have about design systems. And I think that's totally fine. I think it's inevitable, but I still know how it's going to shake out. And I don't have a lot of that firsthand experience other than it feels like a pretty big effort. And so there's really got to be a clear payout for that.
Lucas, and what is your perspective on the web components from engineering view?
Yeah, I think I'd like to shake the hand of whoever pitched the project brief first, because to get something like this built with the technology this early on, when not a lot of teams are doing this, I think it takes a lot of planning and a lot of thinking and a lot of it describing the business need for something like this. I think everyone touched on it, right? But there is value in web components specifically for Polaris. But I think from the engineering perspective, it's a risk that you take. But I do think there are a lot of benefits, to Dan's point, of moving towards more of a community-oriented project. I think for anyone wondering if you should be using web components, I would say keep an eye out on the ecosystem. It often takes one big team, Polaris, to push that barrier. And you'll start seeing supporting libraries and supporting frameworks start to adopt web component support or start to think of web components first. And as soon as you see that happen, I would say that's a good time to maybe move in with less risk. But I would say measure your capacity for risk at your team right now before you adopt it.
And is there how would you do the migration? So if we are using React components already, is it easy to just wrap web components as a part of React components and do the transition smoothly behind the scenes?
It really depends on your implementation. I would say that in general, it should be straightforward, right? Web component, you can use a web component inside a React component. I think that's the beauty of web components. You can use it in a Vue component. You can use it in Angular component. You can use it in HTML. The question that kind of arises is where do you put your actual business logic? And to Maya's point, right? What does your new operating model look like now that you're supporting these new paradigms? And also there's a lot of education for engineering. It does change a lot of things in the back end. That's not just your code. So it's something to keep an eye. The difficulties, I think, are beyond the code is what I meant.
Love it. Great. Any final thoughts on the web components and this new trend in the market? We can move to the patterns. Great. So let me just pull up the patterns from the Shopify design system. They have a lot of and very interesting patterns. The way how they document and explain everything is so impressive. They even have recorded demos where you can see a thing in action. Does anyone have any first reactions on the patterns within the Shopify design system, what they like, or maybe what kind of opportunities you see just by scanning their guidelines? Dan, will you like to go first and share your thoughts on the patterns and maybe overall perspective on the future of patterns?
Yeah, I can start broadly. And this kind of echoes my sentiments generally about Polaris. A thing that they seem to always have been good at and continue to be good at is when I, as a consultant, when I work with many different design systems as opposed to one very deeply, but instead broadly, sometimes one of the first things I have to ask a team is how do you define the difference between a component and a pattern? Because the answer is not the same across teams. So again, Polaris solves that very elegantly right at the top. They say, before you even get into the patterns, they say what a pattern is. It's a preferred solution to a common merchant goal in the admin. Okay, so it's not like just a thing that you can put there, but they are preferred solutions. And then within that context, they say, and this is how we deliver those solutions, and this is how you can implement those similar solutions. If those are the problems that you're actually trying to solve, I think is the subtext of that. So I think that context setting is just as important as to the fidelity of the solutions as well, because they're saying, if you have this problem, then this is the solution to that. If you don't have this problem, then this is probably not the right pattern for you. An obvious thing, but just I wanted to admire and give the Polaris team their flowers again for just the clarity that they have in how they describe this and how they contextualize it for people who want to implement it first. And then, of course, they do an excellent job all around of helping you with the implementation too. But I think they do a better job of context setting than most of the design systems I've come across.
And do you have any good examples of design systems where they nailed the patterns and you really like the way how it's documented, maybe some specific framework is being used?
Come back to me. I'll think on that. Let me think on that for a minute.
Love it, love it. My favorite is IBM patterns, and they also have contributions from the community. So a lot of people are contributing back and saying how exactly, for example, the notifications should be shown within the product, or how filtering within the tables should be done within the product. So there's a lot of contribution from the community within IBM Carbon Design Systems that I really like. My perspective on the patterns, it's a combination of components to solve specific user problem. I really hope that the patterns will be another interesting opportunity for design system to evolve and bring more disciplines into design system rather than having designers, engineers, accessibility experts, and others, is to bring quality assurance teams and product managers. And actually within Shopify patterns, they have an interesting pattern explaining how exactly they are communicating to the users about the new features. And this is this is a golden nugget for the go-to-market teams or product managers, where they have dozens of products and they would like to know what is the best activation flow possible within our domain, within our product for the specific user audience that we're serving. So they have a lot of things on how exactly to onboard people, how to do the activations. And I feel like this is the place where they collaborate a lot with product managers. And I love this. Maya, do you have any thoughts on the patterns?
Yeah, I think it's echoing some comments from earlier. It really shows Shopify's design perspective here, right? It's not just here's all the parts, but here's some more of these preferred solutions. Here's our perspective on how this comes together. I think the other thing I noticed as you're highlighting this page is on the new web component side, it seems like they're starting to build that a lot into these kind of tutorials. Here's your, getting started to build these different app UIs, and they're baking a lot of that in. And so it gives you that starting point. And then they also have this checklist ready to launch. Does this meet our standards? And it walks through that quality checklist as well. So they're certainly layering a lot more of that kind of perspective and that go-to-market aspect. And I think for consumers or developers that are building these apps on top of Shopify's platforms, they're providing an amazing amount of guidance to really get that started and provide that perspective. So it's super easy to put out something that's going to be and cohesive with the rest of their individual storefront, but also the broader principles that come with Shopify. So I think I can see how they're starting to iterate on these patterns and building that directly into those web component app guidelines. I don't remember specifically what they call it, but it's a really smart evolution. And I think a sign of that team really having a perspective on how things come together. I know that's something we've heard from design system consumers of, with all these parts, we can still create these kind of inconsistent solutions. And so is there a way to guide teams a little bit more without building it for them? And so it seems like they've found a really elegant solution here.
Love it. And I like the way how it's easy to everyone just to contribute and discuss that on the GitHub. If you have any things to share about this specific pattern, you can just do that on the GitHub and it's open for everyone. So this kind of level of openness within the design system is so impressive. Patricia, do you have any thoughts on patterns? Did your team work on the patterns before, or are you planning to create patterns, define patterns in your product?
Yeah, actually, I'm surprised that there are so few patterns here at Shopify. So the list of components is very long, just few patterns. But I might assume from why that happened. I think that most of design systems starts from components, and then the teams that are using it actually create the patterns. And then maybe they contribute back. That's the model the DS team at Zalando works in. So the patterns there are tiles, and they are owned by the local product teams, not the. And I think that maybe just a few patterns that we see in the Shopify are those that are really strong and really prevent the experience. Yeah, but at the DS, if you look at Zalando design system, the list of tiles is like super long.
Love it. Yeah, and I feel like maybe the reason why they are not showing all the patterns is because it's like very internal information, because all the learnings that you have from talking with the end users, seeing the metrics, could be captured as a part of the patterns, right? Where you can define what is the best way to solve specific user intention, right? And maybe in the future, there will be design systems who are just locking specific categories. So you need to sign in. And if you are working within the Shopify company, you will get access, but it's not always publicly available. So yeah. And other things that I really like about the Shopify patterns is they have ability to copy the link, but I wish I could copy the instructions for the specific pattern and put it into my Visual Studio Code or Cursor so that it will follow a specific approach on which kind of component to use when we are alerting user about new feature, or if we are alerting about the success state within our experience. So this will help the Visual Studio Code to understand what kind of components to use in order to solve this specific user problem. Lucas, do you have any thoughts on the patterns from engineering perspective?
I think it's interesting. Patricia noted this, but they don't have a lot of like exposed patterns. But the ones that they do that caught my eye is card. And this comes back to a conversation that I had with my team a little while ago, which is like the fact that a card is really like a particle in a wave, right? It's both a component and a pattern. You cannot extricate card in either one without putting it in both. Cards are both a documentable, deliverable thing that you can ship out, but it's also a set of recipes that you give to your team, because as anyone who's ever refactored a card or redesigned a card knows, there is no single one solution that will catch it all for your entire team. And so it needs to be documented as if it was a pattern, but also shipped like a component, which makes it particularly difficult, I think, as a design system solution. So I thought it was really neat that it was up there along with like global navigation. You have card. I also really appreciate the way they document it, like the layout and the way they're very opinionated about what to do there.
Lucas, do you believe that the one opportunity here, how to connect QA teams here into design systems, is maybe exposing end-to-end tests in some kind of way on the documentation? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the teams that I've worked on, we do visual regression testing on our doc site and on our storybook, right? So in many cases, people are doing testing at the pattern level at the very least, if not at the product when the design system gets shipped. But yeah, I think every team should leverage testing before it ships out so that you make sure you're not breaking anything else when you do ship out like a card. I think cards in general are prone to breaking a lot of other things. If you make style changes and then all of a sudden your table is wrong, it's one of the few places that I would highly emphasize testing or QA from like PMs.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking is that QA teams, they are already documenting specific experiences as a test cases, where they can say, given user on the dashboard page, when user just created a store, then show specific activation flow for the user, right? And those kind of things, it's already documented. They already have test cases that can run without touching the product. It can run on the server as a part of CI/CDs and everything else. So is there a way for design system to bring those kind of end-to-end test cases to the design system documentation, define reusable patterns and document it here? What are your thoughts on that? Connecting QA and design system. Is there an opportunity at all?
Could you rephrase the question? Are you saying, is there a way for us to maybe set up like a way for designers to do QA on the doc site?
Is there a way to bring quality assurance teams to the design system so that they will have their own section within the patterns, maybe like actions or something where they can share their test cases that will help designers and engineers to understand, okay, within this specific experience, we have those kind of sets of actions. User can do 5 things. Out of those like 5 things, they are using 3 pattern, like 1 pattern across that. This is very early ideas, but I'm thinking about the ways how to bring more disciplines into the design system so that like we could, because quality assurance teams, they already document every available action within the product, right? So how to bring this kind of deliverables, the outcomes that they already spend a lot of time into the design system. Is there a way to do that? Have you seen any good examples on that?
I think this one's tricky, right? Because it is very organizational based. Probably there's a lot of really great like regression testing suites that you can share. At Sprout in particular, we did something we called feature file. So every component had if you've ever written Gherkin or Cucumber, which is our designers would write out the entirety of that, like in English language syntax, what the component is supposed to do. And that translates directly to a Cucumber test suite, which you can directly share out to a QA team to make sure it does what it's supposed to do. But is that like a one size fits all solution? I don't think so. I think design systems teams really need to make that call. And I'm really curious to see if anyone else on this team has an interesting way that they approach this, because I'm really curious too.
I can chime in here if that's all right.
Please.
In general, I think that design systems are often and sometimes should be an output of design process. To the question that you posed, Farid, and Lucas, I appreciate your answer there as well. Is there a way to involve QA people in the design system? I don't know, tooling wise, technically, maybe, but as Lucas said, that's very dependent on a lot of different variables. But is there a way to involve QA people in the design process? Absolutely. And then when they're involved in the design process, the outputs of that process then can be systematized, right? And that way it becomes an output into the design system. One of my favorite stories about QA people is I worked with an organization many years ago, 9 years ago now, and the QA person on the project, she knew more about the interface design and user needs than anybody on the project because she was so intimately familiar with the use case. What ended up happening was, as the design system work became more collaborative and included other disciplines by default, QA started getting involved in the process more and more. Rather than coming in at the end and checking to see if everything aligns, QA was involved more in the beginning of the project, and eventually she got promoted to be an art director because she knew the level of fidelity of what an art director was doing initially. We just needed to include her sooner and realize, oh, she can do way more than just QA on this project and this work. She has a role that's much more needed up front rather than at the end as a compliance role, but it's more of an input. So I think that a lot of times a design system is reflective of the design process, and it's a systemization of that process. As you make the process more collaborative, you include more disciplines, and then the design system can then reflect that as the output. So I think that's the way that we get there. We get there as including more people up front, that then the design system reflects it as an end product or as a byproduct of it.
Love it. This is a great story. And yeah, I truly believe that because they are spending so much time going through every product experience, trying to document and test it. So they know every little detail, every little edge case that will be so helpful and useful for the product teams, engineering teams, design teams to know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I just thought that similar thing happened with content design from this story. Like, that was part of the process, not necessarily systematized. Content designers just were coming in and filling the copy or providing the copy up front. And now, even here in Polaris, we see content as partner for design based on the foundation, not design foundation. So we have foundation, then we have design, and then we have content.
Love it. Yeah, content being a part of the design system is like one of the crucial things. I'm curious if there will be some kind of design system maturity, and on the highest levels, you have multiple disciplines involved, not just designers and engineers and accessibility experts. I hope that will be the future. Maybe it will be called product system by that time, not the design system. Then what are your thoughts on design word within the design system? Why it's not a product system? Why it's not an engineering system?
Sorry, Farid, is that to me?
Yeah.
I'm of two minds about it. In one way, I think that words are very powerful. In a lot of ways, words make the world. So us being very specific about the words we use, it can affect who gets included and who doesn't get included in things, what we think a thing is for and not for. So I think that the words are very important and we should get them right. On the other side of it, it's all those things. Product
Mhm.
system, design system, yes, it still is a design system. Engineering system, yes, it is. A content system, sometimes, yeah. So I'm split about it because it's like, we're not saying something that's inaccurate. We're also not saying something that's fully accurate. And if we look at the etymology, because I'm a word nerd, if we look at the etymology of both the words design and system, they mean the same thing. So it's saying this is like the thing, which is like, yeah, it is. We are all working on the thing that we use to make good experiences for our users. We need to be specific about it. We also need to find a term and a phrase that does include everyone. That's hard to do. So it's not a surprise to me that we haven't found the perfect phrase that fits it and includes everybody. I think the pursuit is worthy. We may not ever get to the destination.
Love it. Maya, do you have any thoughts on the patterns? Maybe some interesting challenges that are still there within the industry, or interesting practices that you tried and you really admire and people love within your teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the nebulous area. Like we talked about a little bit, how people have different definitions of patterns. At one point, we did add patterns to our doc site, and it was very much what's the right level of pattern. I think the challenge that I see coming into play, and maybe this kind of ties into the QA conversations, is how do we enforce this, right? How do we know that this is actually doing what we need it to do? It's not something that you can plug and play into a Figma file or into code. It's more of these like guidance and principles. So where's the check that this is actually being followed? And is it more of a suggestion and kind of those like best practices? And here's a starting point to put together some of these common patterns, or is it intended to be more of like a plug and play playbook? And so I think there's levels to that, but I think it's really interesting talking about QA, and you guys are totally right. Like they know where all of the little use cases and corner cases are and can help dig into that. And so I think the more we can empower those types of design system consumers and users and supporters to really be able to self-serve from this single source of truth, then it can be a really powerful tool to communicate and kind of question like, hey, we see that this is a documented best pattern. There's some research behind why it's done that way. There's some cohesiveness with other areas of the ecosystem, and really trying to bring that all to the surface. But I think that's where, in my experience at least, it's a little harder to get visibility on how those are actually being used and how useful they are to teams and consumers. I think it's a lot more flexible. And then across design systems, there's different flavors of it. As I loved Lucas's example talking about cards. We were similarly looking at refactoring card recently as well, and trying to figure out like, do we really structure this out with all of these zones and this very specific anatomy? And so I think how Shopify has that kind of middle ground where they have the card component with these pre-built variants, but then they also have more of a breakdown if you wanted to compose something yourself as a pattern. I think that adds a nice level of flexibility. But I guess all that to say, it goes back to that classic like design system balance of like, how flexible are we versus how rigid are we? And patterns are in the middle and a little more subjective than more of the components that you can just pop right in there. Then does it pass the QA check or not?
Love it. And how do you find all these patterns? Do you have some kind of sessions with the team to go through the product itself and trying to define those kind of patterns within the product?
Yeah, in our case, we did some like kind of card sorting to figure out like what's the right grouping, I think, in our experience. And I see you pulling those screenshots in there. Like we looked a lot at messaging and notifications, and then broke those down into, are these alert notifications? Are they more like informational notifications? Something that's like a very important error that you can't proceed, that's going to have a much different state than something that's more informational. And so trying to carve out those decision points that we hear from consumers about which do I use for which case, and then trying to build in all the accessibility best practices. I will say our patterns at REI were very much informed by the accessibility around particularly forms and notifications, right? And so making sure that we're providing all that sort of information and guidance that we can't build into a component or a pattern, but again, making it available. And that's the beauty of documentation and getting it all out there. But we definitely did a lot of external audits at how other design systems have handled patterns, and there's a lot of variability there too. So I think it really has to be tailored to the specific organization and the product ecosystem that you're supporting, and what kind of feedback and guidance those users need too.
Love it. And recently we've done WISE Design System, Inspect and Reflect. And the interesting thing about the patterns, they also highlighted in their communications different communication channels as email. So they are not limiting themselves within the product, within the web as a platform, but they are also saying that if you are trying to communicate to the user as a business objective, here are the ways how you can do that within the product, through the email, like covering different channels and covering that as a part of the pattern, as a learning, as a best practice to scale to other product pillars if they have multiple products supporting.
That's really smart.
Love it. Great. I know that we have only a couple minutes left. Speaking about the components, and the reason why we didn't cover components as much this time is because Shopify Design System is really good at adopting and using their design system actually in the product. So it was really hard to find different opportunities where there are other variations of the components used within the product that are not covered within the documentation, so that we could discuss what will be your adoption strategies. I've heard that within the Shopify, they have like really high adoption rate of their design system within the product. That's why I really admire them and like really love the craft level and like the amount of details that they have. Here are a couple things within their design system documentation. I highlighted all the core parts, core aspects of the things that they are documenting as a part of the component. They have props, always required, anatomy, only in specific cases, not all the components are supporting that. Best practices, content guidelines, this is the place where they are connecting the content, accessibility, related components, patterns, and resources. So these are like the core building blocks for their design system component documentation. There are a couple examples where their components are being used, and they are being used a lot. The only things that I was able to find is the button groups, but I feel like this is the topic that everyone struggles. They documented button groups as a place where to have multiple buttons to the specific action. And within their product, they have a couple examples on that, as paging controls are using button groups. Some others are some other things as inline stacks. But again, this is all things that people can see within the product. Design system can see how their components are being used. In some cases, invest more into specific component family. In some cases, maybe refactor or completely remove. And within their documentation, we can see that they have a lot of things going on because there are so many things are deprecated, meaning that they went through a specific component family, they saw maybe that it's not working or the end users are using it differently. So they rolling back or deprecating them and replacing with something else. Great. So thank you very much for joining this time. It was a pleasure chatting with you. So if you would like to join other sessions, the upcoming one will be related to design tokens, where we are going to talk about the frameworks, the tools that are available on the market, and how you can define tokens within your products, within your design systems. Thank you very much. Thank you, Patricia, Maya, and Lucas for joining as well.
Thank you for inviting me.
It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Yeah.
It's great to talk and learn with you all too.
Thank you. I'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Free.